Welcome, Claus.
I have a school in Denmark and a consultancy who's called, in Danish, it's called Enneagramstedet, which means the Enneagram place. And I think I normally say I have three shops in the shop. I have a public speaking where I do big introductions to a lot of people talking about the Enneagram at their yearly gathering or whatever. I do consultancy work where I do team building, leadership programs, everything regarding to working together with people in corporates for a longer period of time. And then I do have open workshops where I work with Susanne Poulsen. And we have, if you take it all, we have a basic introduction, we have a practitioner, we have a practitioner management practitioner, we have a master class. And recently, Susanne has developed a teaching program as well. So I think if you go ballistic and you want it all, I think you can be at 45 days in total in our school.
Yeah, no, I met Suzanne in Belgium in 2010, I believe, or did I meet her before that? But that was my first trip to Belgium. Yes. And I did kind of think about it, that same trip. And really, yeah, it was great. It was really, really wonderful because I was very kind of happy, like chuckling, because people said tree type. And that's what I called it originally, was 3 types. And then I refined it to include the 3 types, the trigram, the symbol showing how they connect to one another, and then tricenter, which is just looking at it from the standpoint of which types are in what triad, which is similar to the Enneagram. It's just the shape of the Enneagram is different with the Tristar because there are 9 types that are in the initiating triad over here for you. And that would be like 3. There'd be 2, 3, and 4. There are 9 Enneagram types that are initiators. There are 9 Enneagram types that are reactors. And there are 9 Enneagram types that are reconcilers. So the image looks differently, but it's still based on the 9 points, and it's still based on the 3 centers. You just learn more about why, let's say, you as the 873, Catherine Bell as the 872, and Sandra as the 874 are all 8s, but it's the 8s that are initiators, that want the new, the changing, the novel. And we're all 8/7s. We just have a different heart type. Then we find the same, like people that you've probably met in life that ended up being a 4/7/9. And even if they're a 4, they have a 9-ish quality, a very ethereal, sort of fluid quality to them. And that's because they're up in that 9 triad with all the 9 types that are adjusting through, in a way, merging, not unlike 9. So it gives another dimension. But having said that, it was great fun to teach in Belgium, because even when I went to breakfast, people were very friendly and they'd say, "Oh, why are you in Denmark?" "Oh, just to teach a course." "Oh, what on?" And I go, "Oh, personality system." "Which one?" And I said, "The Enneagram." "Oh, I know my Enneagram type." And that was really impressive, because even though the Bay Area had a very strong community, you're not going to have people in restaurants in 2010 tell you their Enneagram type. So it really was influential. And we've talked about this per capita. There are more people that know their Enneagram type in Denmark than any place in the world.
Yeah, I think so. I think most HR people know that there is something called the Enneagram. They're not all into it. They don't understand it. But I think, at least for the last 10 years, because of the test reports and the way we're teaching the Enneagram, It's a very powerful and it's a tool
Yeah.
that's been taken
Yeah.
very seriously for big corporates in Denmark.
I did the same thing as you, Claus, and this is how it impacted me as well. I knew typologies beginning in 1970. Actually, I knew things even earlier, but like more formally trained on them. I knew micro expressions, I knew body language, I knew gestures, I knew behavioral manifestations. And so I knew a lot about what you could read in a human being. I knew archetypes. But while I was in the cosmetic industry, I was trying to be able to quickly and efficiently hire and place people in the right job so that I wouldn't have to travel so much instead of coming back and training people again. And it was based on convenience. So I just would ask people the same questions, the 5 words they'd use to describe themselves to a total stranger, and why, and their greatest strength and greatest weakness, and why. So those first 7 questions I used hiring people, because no matter how much someone prepared for an interview, those questions got people to their core fears and their idealized images. And ultimately, and strategy.
Do you remember? I think it was in Belgium where we did this clipboard where we spent a full day or something like that, and we tried to create our own billboard about that's my personality, and we should be honest, and we should talk about both the high side and low side. Do you remember?
Yes, I sure do.
And I remember the totem animal that I chose at that point was the silverback gorilla. And I remember I had to present my own. There was a couple of other 8s, and 2 of them had a silverback gorilla as well.
Yeah, and I did too. It's so natural.
So then I will pick something up for you. You will laugh. Look what I bought.
That's wonderful. You know, I'll show you what Spencer got me, who's an 8.
And how cool is this motherfucker?
His heart, he gave it to me when he was a little boy, and he didn't like that it was connected. He wanted the hands to be free to do things. I use it on children that I'm coaching.
And he's standing in my living room. I paid $1,000 for him. I love him dearly. And that's
It's perfect. It's perfect. I actually had a bigger one, this and I had one in black and I had one in white, because Spencer used to buy them for me all the time because he was a little 8 too. And early on, when I made my first set of Enneagram cards, and even with doing that research, it was probably 1,000 people when I worked for Lancôme. I got the lexicon, but I didn't know the Enneagram yet. And so when I found the Enneagram and it matched, I thought, wow, those are the same clusters. That's the person that likes to do this, do that, but I didn't have a formula. And then when I did a research study with people who knew the Enneagram and people who didn't know the Enneagram, the answers came out the same. And then I was hooked. And here I am 24 studies later and not stopping. But having said that, what would you say was the most meaningful thing for you? It was understanding why we're gorillas, because certainly people who had mistyped might say, oh, yes, female 8s wouldn't like the gorilla. I go, yeah, they do. Mm. We didn't need it. And
I think
it would turn out that they weren't 8s.
Many things had struck my mind and blew me away for the last almost 25 years working with Enneagram. First of all, that male and female Enneagram style are the same. Of course, there is things that the gender can do and cannot do, and there's certain religion where you can do this, you are not allowed to do that, and all that. But if we peel off those layers, I think we are extremely lookalikes, even though we are male or female or whatever gender you will.
Yeah.
But meeting people from all around the world that are a type 1 in Australia and a type 1 in China and a type 1 in Copenhagen is the same.
Yes.
And it still gives me that hope for the planet that, oh, couldn't we stop fighting of religion and money, and we all have the basic same needs. So that was one thing that struck me. And then for many years, I remember, I think, I'm quite sure, for many years I thought I was a socialite, because not because I didn't understand my own type, but I at that point of time I didn't fully understand what social meant. It was actually I think it was Dirk who he trained at Naranjo, I think. Claudio Naranjo, he trained for a couple of years, and he went to a dinner party here in my house in Denmark, and he said, "Claus, you're not a social." I was, why do you think you're social? And we talked about it. And he said, "You're sexual, no doubt about it. You're one-on-one." And I remember details. I don't remember the group. So digging more and more into the study of instincts and trying to understand the subtypes have created a lot of new insights for my own personal development. And I'm starting to be, I have to be aware that I don't sound like an old mean man. I actually more and more understand why you old guys who've been here for many, many years, that you're getting angry with all the superficial Enneagram treating. Where I'm getting more and more precise, and I'm trying to get more and more brutally honest about what a certain type really is. And I think I do most training. I think in that aspect, I look a lot like Mara Sakura. I think I work mostly in corporate life. And so I don't teach the Enneagram very spiritual, even though within me I understand it, but I don't talk that much about it, because corporate life in Denmark, they don't want to hear it. And
right.
And in Denmark, they especially don't want to hear anything regarding to any kind of religion. The minute it smells like religion, they're off. So from time to time, I still have trouble to having corporates to understand the validity of the Enneagram, even though the problem is getting. I normally say to people, you know what? I don't have time. I'm getting close to 60. I have 20 years back to try to save the planet, and I don't have time for arguing if you believe it or not. Try it. If it works for you, listen. If it doesn't, pick anything else.
That's right. You know, it was really meaningful with Naranjo's work with the subtypes, because he only had a few of the archetypes. So when I met him in 1996, that was the same time he validated my research, because I had at that point like over 2.5 years of research. And he had asked Jack Labanuskas to have me bring it, because Jack said, "Oh, Katherine will be in your course." And he said, "Well, is that the person that did the article with Enneagram Monthly on image presentation and style?" And he said, "Oh yeah, that's her." And then Jack, being curious, said, "Well, can you look at her work and see if she's gotten it right?" And he said, "Sure." Well, I gave him my book, and the night we started, and the next morning he came in and he said, "I'm going to change the topic. I'm going to teach the Enneagram, but I'm going to include the instinctual subtypes based on Katherine's book. It validated that the work came from me, but would I include his assessment in my book?" I immediately went back and I met him in April. By May, I had the book revised and his qualities added. But at the same time, I had asked him if there were countertypes for all the types, because that's what I had found, that they were in a stacking order. And he said, "Oh, people always ask me that, if there's a counterphobic 1 or a counterphobic 2, and I go, no, I'm not talking about phobic. I'm talking about counter type. And for example, the counter NV4. And he said he hadn't thought about it. But during that training, we compared notes. Everyone went and copied my book, my subtype book, and we combined the training so that the subtypes reflected his teachings and they were validated by my research, so it worked perfectly. But there are actually, in that stacking order, your sexual and social are very close. And all 8s are naturally self-pres because we're a gut type. So that would show. And then there's an identification. Like some people have a negative identification about social. They had bad experiences growing up socially. And so they think they're not a social, but they could be. They're just antisocial. And then there's some people positively identified and want the groups and to do things with others. And that's what your social is like. And then the third quality is neutral. People that maybe are positive and negative, but not really one or the other. Mm. And then you just stack all 3 of them and you get not only the stacking order that you use those instincts and the stacking order that you use your types in the tritype. And then it works really perfectly to create this dimensional aspect. And from there, because most of the people teaching the Enneagram in 1996 did not know about subtypes because they had come down through the Jesuits. And so it was just, Naranjo wasn't teaching it yet. And as a result, then when people in that first conference with the IEA, the first IEA conference, we discovered that that was a key feature, that if someone was emotional, they were made a 4, but maybe they were just the sexual instinct and not a 4. Or since, of course, I found that they usually have 4 in the tritype, so that became very important. But it expanded everything. And then I went all over the country teaching people based on my research on the subtypes. And then by the time you came in, you learned them right up front, did you not? Because Dawn and Rusty learned from me. And then I think in like 95, and then they started teaching it as part of their part 3, which changed, but back in 1995. So it was like 98, I believe, that they started teaching subtypes, but called them variants, because Dawn already had the term subtypes as the wing types. Mm. And that's why there's 2 words, variants and subtypes. And it just kind of made things cohesive. So what seemed like right or wrong ended up being right if you put it together and it worked.
And so, I remember when Susanna and I do our instinct workshop, we talk a little bit about the history of the instincts and how different teachers have named them differently and why, and some call it stacking and some call it the way I teach it is that instead of making it a religion, what's theory that is correct, it's more how do you see this in you? What do you relate to? And I think the subtypes / the instincts are so damn important to understand, combined with the strategy of the type, because then we suddenly understand what is my core way of being in the world if I'm a sexual. I remember back in one of the first Enneagram conferences in the United States, I went to. There was this Australian guy, I can't remember his name, David.
Yeah, David. Mm-hmm.
Yes. And he was totally convinced that I was a type 7. And I told him, I'm not a 7. I don't have any 7 issues, not at all. All my issues is regarding to be an 8, no doubt about it. But because I was so colorful, I was so funny, I loved the party, I loved to be around with people. And that was just my sexual instinct. And I have my 7 wing for sure, and I have 7 in my subtype, so I can be pretty 7ish, and I use my 7ish style a lot when I do public speaking, almost to the point of being a stand-up comedian, still trying to put some heavy thing into what the Enneagram is all about, but making people understand a bit different in a light/funny way, that people get attracted to the Enneagram instead of thinking it's something that they have to spend 2,000 years in understanding. No, it's
No.
because most corporate, they don't have the time. They need the tool. They need what can we do next month so we can improve the quality of the work environment. What can we do tomorrow to remove these obstacles, whatever obstacle we're having?
Yeah. And haven't you found that it doesn't matter where you teach, that the results ultimately are the same, that if people are interested, that it's really transforms the team? I know that some companies would require that teams all participate, and other companies kind of made it an elective. And one company that was really on the cutting edge was the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco and LA. I taught in both, had contracts for 15 years. So I worked in every division, and then also to team 5 at the very top, the 5 people, which changes. It's a different group of 5, but the head was in that class in 2003. So it just shows you. And there were 2 8s, the head of the San Francisco bank and the head of the LA bank. And in this meeting, there were the team 5 members plus 2 people each, so 15 people. And as I was talking about the types, when we got to type 9, he said, well, you know, we're pretty dynamic people as 8s, when he was talking about the LA branch manager and the San Francisco manager, but we'll never make the top spot because we're too controversial. Whereas Janet, the 9, is really smart, but she can fly under the radar. She doesn't ruffle people's feathers. And he said, I predict that she will have that top spot in the next number of years. And of course, that's exactly what happened. So it's almost like each type has a particular gift in every area of life, that we need all 9 types. We need all the variables with the instincts, and we need all the variables with the tritypes. And it's all mathematical in both cases. And in the case of tritype, it literally is a spiral that unfolds. It begins with a 3, 6, 9, triple primary. And then gradually it moves out until the N types. So there's in the outer edge, there are 3, then there are 3 in the middle and 3 in the beginning. And they end up combinations of, like one primary, you have 3 as your primary type, but then you have 8 and 7, which are hexad types. So the more hexad types you have, the more of a specialist you are. The more primary types you have, the more inclined to do things a more traditional way that speaks to kind of the group. And we need more people that are 3, 6, 9s than we do specialists, but we need both. And it was wonderful to see it mathematically roll out, because I tried to explain it, but it's easier to see a picture of it. Because then you say, okay, that person really does things their own way. You as an 8, 7, but you're still gonna want that outcome. You're more results driven, because 8 is results driven and 3 is results driven.
Many times people thought I was a type 3. It could be that I was driving and bragging about a big car, whatever. And I said, no, I'm not a type 3. I don't have the pitfalls of type 3. I don't have the psychological structure of type 3. I understand type 3 because I've been a competitive sports achiever all my life. I worked in sales for 20 years, which is a type 3 job, but I'm not a type 3. every time I interview a type 3 and when they talk about what happens on the inside, that's not my deal.
Yeah,
I have
it's
my own.
not. You're saying something really important, and that is that it's these idealized images, these core fears, that the defense strategy will then turn on if there's a threat to the idealized image, because the defense strategy does not want to experience the core fears. It feels life-threatening. Whether it's real or imagined does not matter. We go into that structure. And if we're healthier, we go in and out of it quickly. If we're not, and it's a long-held wound, then it just takes more work. But the structure of 3 is go, go, go. It was called ego go because you can't stop. And like 8 and 3 will like each other because they both like results. They like the end product. But along the way, the 8 becomes frustrated with the 3 because the 3 will navigate a situation so that they kind of look good when they're face a problem, whereas the 8 wants to tell it like it is. And then you see the difference between the 8 and 3. And so when the 8s learn that, oh, 3s are just adapting and you need that too, and you have better outcomes if you're doing both. And then 3 learns, oh, I see the 8 doesn't like that because they don't feel like they can count on me or what I'm going to say or do. And it's just so important what you're saying because it is the internal construct. And because we have a type from each center, it's explained. And it's huge. And that's why I put so much energy into researching everything and finding out these nuances. And then all of us have gone out into the world and taught it for 25 years or more. I'm like now on 40, if you can believe that. And I've never been bored in 40 years.
I normally say I don't have a job. I have a hobby that pays the bills. When the pandemic was worst, my daughter said, "Dad, if it's really going bad, you can become a sales manager again." And then before I even replied, she said, "No, Dad, with you, there's no turning back."
No, there's no turning back.
I would never be able to have what I call a normal job. Sometimes I say when I have people who are mistyping if they're 3 or 8, I say, first of all, I very rarely meet an 8 who think they are 3. I normally see 3 males who think they are 8 or wants to be or whatever. And then I have 2 things I say type 3 are more charming.
Yes.
Type 8 are more charismatic. It's both good qualities, but it's different in flavor. That's the good story. The bad story is that the 8 stabs you from the front and the 3 stabs you in the back. And those 2 stories alone make people say, okay, stop it. Then I'm a 3 or then I'm an 8. They're not enough at all.
That's a great example.
Yeah, it's actually pretty accurate.
And so what are you planning to do in the future? Anything coming up that you want to share?
I would love to give the Enneagram even more depth, which means getting rid of even though I use humor and make light introductions, I still try to be very, very seriously. And people always tell me that even though I make jokes about types and I make almost like it's a theater, they understand that I'm talking beautifully about 9 different ways of being on planet Earth. So I want the quality of the Enneagram to improve. I would love that some kind of research could close the mouth of the people who still don't believe the Enneagram. I think most of the people who think that the Enneagram is not valid are people who are afraid of the Enneagram, they're afraid that it is simply too powerful for them to comprehend. But I would just love that eventually we could put some check mark on the Enneagram that people say, okay, got it.
Claus, because of what you said about research, it's very important to recognize that all the soft sciences are something that cannot be proven. But what they can do is use qualitative research where you can set the same parameters. And what started as discovery for me with my first research, then when people were saying the same things, the probability goes up. And then like, maybe 4 or 5 years ago now, maybe 5, Sterling Mosley did the same test that I did with a different group of people, and it validated the research that my work did. So that is a proving. But because psychiatry, psychology, and anything that is measuring human nature is considered a soft science. So it has to be qualitative research. And that's why I have the collection of adjectives, the collections of themes. And what a lot of people don't know is that when I started 40 years ago, the lexicon was not there, it was before the books, and I didn't really start my certification work for 9 years. So I taught the Enneagram 9 years before I did the certifications and I did the more formal research. But it didn't matter whether it was the cosmetic industry or where I gave that questionnaire, the results were the same. And the testing instrument has been the same for 40 years. The only thing now is that I've given the new test to 300,000 people, and they haven't all been interviewed. I've interviewed over 100,000 people, but if you look at the test itself, it's 10 tests in one. It's asking people the adjectives they would use to describe themselves to a stranger, and then it's recording what cards are chosen. And I finally found someone that could program it about 8 years ago, so that it notifies people if they're using the 9 pattern or the 6 pattern. And it's a very specific pattern because they change their mind as they're going through the test. That's the only way we're going to get to it until scientists agree on the value of qualitative research, which is going up. And to tell you the truth, that's why Naranjo liked my work, because he also did qualitative research when he was at Harvard and Ohio State and Berkeley at the very beginning of trying to understand personality as a separate entity. Or Karen Horney, it was all through observation. So what he liked is it wasn't just my observing people, that I was actually getting them to name for themselves who they were. So I think we'll see it, but I don't think it'll ever be a true false, because there's always going to be variables until we work out all the variables. And even then,
I think one of the reasons why there will be variables is that we're not all teachers. If we call ourselves high-level teachers, we're not 100% accurate about what do we define of a one-on-one instinct or social instinct. Oh, what happened? Wow. For example, I have listened to all Mary Sikura's, all his podcasts, every single of them. And I actually more and more like some of the descriptions. I'm about to read John Lukowicz's amazing book about subtypes, instinct, that I really find inspiring. But even though high-level teachers are not totally agreeing on the framing or the wording, and as long as we can't agree on the exact wording, how should anyone from the outside say this is correct and this is wrong? And I actually don't think. I remember when you talked about, when Don and Russ talked, especially Russ talked about stacking and blind spot. He disliked the word subtype because Don did the subtype naming with the wings and so on. For me, it's just ego games. It's the same. Just call it what you want. I'm actually a little bit curious about how have you seen the stacking part? Or you see them as a high pile and a second pile and a low pile. That's how I remember you explained it back in
Yeah, six variations, which I do in the advanced because it can be a little overwhelming. So some people have two really close, and then the third is low. Other people have the stair step where it just equally moves. And then other people have one very tall and then the other two low. But there's the extreme version of that and the average version of that, which is why there's 6 patterns. But there are really 3 patterns in 2 variables. So if you look at it from that perspective, it makes a huge difference, because people that have the tall pattern of their dominant instinct, everybody agrees what their instinct is, because it's blatant. It's everything that they do. If the other 2 are low. But if people have 2 very close, the way you do, and the way I do, mine is sexual self-pres rather than the sexual social, then I need my comforts. But what about as a child? I wanted comfort. I needed to make sure I had my stuff around me. Now that's just 8, but it's like how much attention goes to making sure that that happens. That's really what becomes critical, like what's happening on an unconscious level, and then what we can measure. And when you have the type, you have the tritypes and the instincts, already you have almost 1,700 patterns. And the way I serve the test is I make it very personalized. So I give everyone 3 versions of each Enneagram type. Then they need to take those and stack them in the order they relate to. And then as these 10 tests are given to the test taker, they're given their first choice cards against their other first choice cards. And you might think, well, what difference does that make? Well, it means that people that came out 873, like you, might have chosen 3 different cards, not the same cards you chose of 8, 7, and 3. So it gives a whole nother dimension. And the same with the patterns for the instincts. I give it the written words, and I give it the cards on the subtypes. But the other thing that you don't know is that in 1998, so I have 2 university validated tests. And the first one was 1998 with California University at Davis, UC California at Davis. And it registered that there were 4 clusters. And one cluster was all the questions having to do that were pretty much universal. Nobody wanted to be cheated on. Nobody wanted to deal with violence. Nobody wanted their heart broken, everything you can imagine. But then there were 3 other categories that perfectly fit the instincts. So it was statistically important and verifiable, therefore validated, that there were these 3 distinct categories, with one being a catch-all for just universal things that all people want, that weren't indicative of one of these 3 qualities. Naranjo liked that one because it was also qualitative. I asked each subtype what words they'd use, etc. And then it was at the time of Helen Palmer and David Daniels' yearly meeting that we did once a year. And there were like 85 people there. And so the whole weekend was on the instincts. Now, putting it into context, 1998 was still pretty early. There were some people that only recently learned about the subtypes, even though it was in Helen's book. And later in like 96, it was in, Tom's book, I think came out in 96. So there were 2 books that had subtypes, and of course the one I had done. But I wasn't, you kind of had to know me to find it until I started advertising in Enneagram Monthly. But otherwise, I have my book coming out now. It's like 500 pages. It's everything I do. It's all the different stackings. It's all the different, just think of anything Katherine thought of when you met me before, and now imagine that I've just squared that. I've done even more. So all the charts that
So
you'd
will I get a signed copy?
it's going to be, people are going to receive it the way they want. So you'd have to see me and have me sign it.
Yeah, of course. That I want.
Yeah.
But,
And then I've got my advanced on just the instincts that was true in 1995 and is still true today, 94, 95. And so it's like, I don't even know how many pages that one is, but the mega book has the Enne style. It has everything with Tritype, all the stuff you haven't seen as well. And Enne style, Subtype, and Tritype 2.0, all of them. And then the one book that has everything for people that just want it all in one place. So it's going out to Amazon. So if you wanted a physical copy, this is the plan anyhow, that you could then order it and it would be sent to you. And I don't have to do the shipping and all that, which is difficult now with the mail. It used to be that I could send anywhere in the world anything under a pound. Now that wouldn't work very well because it's over a pound.
So most of my teaching is, and I do a lot of teaching in English, but it's because of big corporates in Denmark that have international employees. But no, I never do teaching in online. And we have asked all our students for the last 5 years since the pandemic, or 4 years at least. We also asked all our students if we could do 50-50 or 70-30, and they all replied, no way. No way, never in a chance, don't do it. But who knows?
And that is the benefit of that 5 hours from tip to tip, because I know when I was certifying with everybody, it meant like flying all over the United States to get things as quickly as I wanted them, and the different conferences. So that's what people factor in if they're coming from Europe and then they're paying for their flight and they're paying, there's no hotel, there's no flight, you just are in the course. And the good thing about Zoom is they have the breakout rooms now, but it does not compare to those 12-hour intensives where we would start with breakfast, meet as a group, and then train in the morning, have a lunch break, train in the afternoon, and have a dinner. So we were literally together for 12 hours for 5 or 6 days, sometimes longer with the longer trainings. And we'd really, really go on that journey together. So I agree with you. There's nothing quite like it. In fact, when Mark Sheehan and Marion Scott were first teaching for Ichazo, it was a 40-day training consecutively taught. So 40 days straight, but it was mostly organized around people that were in the world as professors, where they were on a schedule like the universities, or they just took that time off or could either afford to or what have you. But the belief was you needed to be doing those exercises from morning till night. And it was spiritual, it was psychological, it was about the body and how everything connects to everything else. And originally, the Enneagram was just a small part of that first training in 1970. And then Naranjo was in that 10-month training for only 6 months, not even 6, just almost 6, but it's technically 5 and a couple weeks. And as a result, he still had met Ichazo in like 1969. And from there, he organized the group that came to Eureka, Chile, and had a lot of fascinating characters in it. A lot of interesting people that were part of the human potential movement. And that's what Esalen is. So a lot of people don't know that. So I'm putting that, the more detailed history that is all documented, rather than this is where the Enneagram came from. It's no, this is what happened here. And it's just simply the dates and from interviews like this. And it's meaningful because you can see when things were lost along the way.
Yeah,
And-
and stories and narratives and rumors were mixed into reality, and suddenly people thought that this happened and this happened, and we still need some of the elderlies to remind us that what actually happened really because sometimes I remember first time I met all you guys. For me, it was like meeting the authors of the books I've read. Like, holy shit, that's the person who wrote that book. And then learning you as friends and co-teachers and laughing and crying with you and sharing and realizing that even though we are the masters and teachers and students, we are all students when it comes to anything. So for me, and I actually think I forgot to mention, of course, David and Dave Daniels and Helen Palmer. I never did training with Helen Palmer. I went to several of her gigs on conferences, but I never went to actual training. I went to training with Jeremy Wagner. No, sorry, David Daniels and Susan Olesek at the EPP. He was one of the teachers there. And I of course, I find it sad to see that my old teachers are getting that old, and eventually we will all die. And if I go back and I remember when I knew the Enneagram, I was 32 years old. I'm close to 60. So it's like, holy shit, where did all these years go? But
or that you meant the gray hair.
I love it. Remember, I'm getting married to a woman with gray hair. So
there you go. Yeah. I'm happy for you, Claus. When are you getting married?
Probably next spring / summer.
Oh, that's wonderful.
You have to come to Amsterdam. So I really want you to meet her. She's so beautiful.
Having said that, like you, it was really nice to see Katherine Fauvre. She said to say hi. I just interviewed her last week. But it was just something wonderful and enjoyable about seeing each other regularly and our Enneagram friends.
Yeah.